have a vivid memory of the day I learned Trayvon Martin was killed. My Facebook newsfeed was filled with some of my friends who were pregnant with black boys at the time, complaining about not being able to sleep, feeling anxious, frustrated, angry, hopeless. They were lamenting bringing their children into this world. Juxtaposed to that anguish were some posts from some of my white friends who were giggling about adorable kitten memes, posting cupcake recipes. Some of them were talking about the death of Trayvon, but it was clear that none of them were holding in their bodies or felt personally threatened by the death of this stranger. I have since become the mother of a delightfully precocious and sweet little boy. I'm curious about his personality and who he'll become, and I admire the crook in his smile. But I also wonder when the oohs and the ahs, the gushing of strangers, will turn into clutched purses, fear, or perceptions of threat. For me, Trayvon is not a stranger. He's my son. And the threat that killed him is not easily exchanged for kitten memes or cupcake recipes. The threat that killed Trayvon is something that I consider every day as a mother and as a scientist. As a scientist, my work focuses on how our lived experiences contribute to racial inequalities in health. I'm haunted by this pattern in the data that indicates that blacks fare worse than whites when it comes to health. For the 15 leading causes of disease, 15 leading causes of death, heart disease, cancer, stroke, hypertension, blacks have an earlier onset, faster progression, and earlier death than whites. What's particularly striking about this pattern is that it persists at every level of socioeconomic status. Even when we account for education, income, health insurance, we still see this difference between blacks and whites. What do we do with that? If it's not education, it's not income, why is race explaining health? How do we understand the probability of my dying sooner than my white counterparts in spite of my education and income? This collision of this deeply personal part of my life and my professional life has led me to a question of what would it take? What would it take for you to understand that racism is more complex than being called a name or even violence at the hands of police? What would it take for you to accept that we still live in a world where the color of someone's skin can get them killed, passed over for a job, denied a loan, denied housing, a fair shot? What would it take for the videos and reports of black bodies being gunned down by police to register as a pattern of racism and not merely as a consequence of insubordination or criminality? What would it take for the outcries of racial injustice to register not as a sensitivity or as a card to be played, but as an unacceptable social reality? What would it take for the data you see and that you say you get? What would it take for you to connect and feel the reality behind that data? What would it take for you to not just feel bad or to empathize, but to act and think differently? To refuse to live in a world where the color of one's skin can dictate their health or well-being? I talk a lot about racism, and I'm used to there being a point in the conversation for the audience to turn inward. They start focusing on their emotions of guilt, shame, anger, indifference.